The objectives are set out under a service level agreement with SPPP. It was originally set out with the Social Security Minister. The Social Security Minister has no oversight, really, of JACS anymore. It's under SPPP, other than the fact that she, obviously, she's the one instrumental in bringing in legislation. And so we work with the policy officers there. And she gets to see our annual report and accounts every year as well, which of course are then placed with the states. All our KPIs and strategic reports are in that annual report, which you'll all have had copies with when it was presented on 7th of April this year.
Okay. So that's...
Yes, it's done every year.
Oh, right, yes, okay.
So in terms of accountability, who would you say you were accountable to?
To Paul Wiley of SPPP. He's heading up. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. I wonder which Minister Paul Wiley is accountable to. Would that be the Chief Minister? Yeah. Yes, okay. Right, so your organisation is accountable from a... Because obviously as a body, Scrutiny holds ministers to account. So what we try to understand is ultimately which minister has the political responsibility. So that's helpful to us to understand that it might be the Chief Minister rather than the Social Security Minister.
Did you say that relationship's changed? It used to be the Social Security Minister.
Yeah, when this Controller Auditor General wanted separation between governance and policy, which was in around about 2019, and things changed there. So governance and funding is separated from lawmaking.
Okay, thank you. It's helpful.
So we're kind of in that, we're a sandwich, we're in the middle of that.
Yeah.
So we've got law coming in or being generated by a Social Security Minister, and we've got funding and governance by somebody else, and we are that conduit that makes that happen, if you see what I mean, and gets the information out there.
Okay, so how does that work? So, like, how do you plan your actual work programme for the year?
We plan it by, if we've got knowledge of incoming legislation, then we'll factor that in. But legislation is a movable feast. We don't always know that. We've got pieces coming in this year that we weren't sure if they were going to come through. And obviously, you know, the 22nd of April, legislation was passed. We didn't know if it was going to go through the states, so it's quite malleable. But our workload is quite consistent generally. We are proactive in lots of ways, but we're also very responsive. I mean, last year, as I said in the annual report, we had a 16% increase on 2003 with over 11,191 contacts from people.
So when that new piece, say any new piece of legislation comes through, what do you then do as an organisation?
Okay, so what we do is we start the training on it immediately.
And that's for businesses, is it?
Well, for anybody, it's public courses, anybody can attend it.
Okay.
Or we'll do, so those are the public ones, they go out to everybody. Or we will do in-house ones where businesses might invite us in. Or we'll go into specific situations like presenting to groups of people or interested parties. We've recently done something with the construction industry. We're doing something with the charities, Jersey Charities Association. I did the breastfeeding initiative earlier this year. So we deliver training as soon as it gets in. We start advising on the potential for new law coming in anyway. So that was even spoken about before it went to the States. This is a potential. You need to be prepared for that. Once we know that it's gone through the States, we start preparing all the documentation and little videos. We've already got a video out there on this new law, even though we don't have an implementation date yet. So we're advising up front so that people have a level of preparedness.
Okay, so quite a lot of face-to-face things then.
Yeah, it is.
Okay,
yeah.
That's interesting, thank you. And so you mentioned about one of the government officers that is your kind of liaison contact. How regular are those meetings?
We have quarterly meetings with them. And there's a group of people that meet for that quarterly meeting. But I have regular contact with policies principals anyway.
Yeah.
And if there was any concerns or if I needed something, I would go directly to them at any time. They're very accessible. It's a very open relationship.
Okay, that sounds positive. And there's a board as well, isn't there? How does that work?
So they're an independent board. We recruited last year. We've got it up to 7 people. It's set down in law. and they look at the oversight. So whilst I deal with the day-to-day running of the organisation, they have a more global view of the organisation and looking at strategy, planning, implementation, looking at workforces, workforce planning for us, and looking at budgeting and funding and things like that.
Okay, thank you. Let's go on to this one. Sorry. It's not you, it's you.
Sorry.
May I just ask, you mentioned in that first section of questioning that you've seen a 16% increase in people coming to your service. Could you tell me what area that increase of people has come from? Is there something in particular that's causing them to come?
No, it's just generic. It's right across all the employment legislation, all the discrimination legislation. Last year we had a few matters to deal with the employee relations, which is about unions. They were resolved very swiftly, but no, there's nothing you can go, oh, there's an issue there. The training that we deliver every month, because it goes out in our newsletter, we will look at what our hotspots have been for the previous month in our stats. So if I see a spike in, I don't know, a lack of terms of employment, we will run a training session on terms of employment. Okay. So we, in that respect, as well as the new law, we're picking up on where people are still getting their minds around the 20-year-old law as well.
Yes, and in relation to family-friendly legislation, of course, that's come from the Social Security Department. So do you provide advice in relation to this law?
Yeah, we do. We started advising on family-friendly in around about 2012 on what this could look like. 2015 it came in because we needed the sex discrimination law to come in. It couldn't stand alone. So we needed that two-pronged approach to that. So at that time, as soon as we knew that sex discrimination was coming in, we started rolling out training for that, and we've continued to do it. The changes to the employment legislation came through in 2020, in June, a revised thing. During the middle of COVID, we ran numerous training sessions and information sessions, and we put stuff out, literally scatterbombed as far as we could with information to get people up to speed with that, because it came in reasonably swiftly. And people were still displaced, I think, is the way that I would think about it, because of lockdown and not as a cohesive group in workplaces and things like that. So you couldn't rely on photocopy chatter or things like that.
And from where you sit, do you think that now employers understand and implement their obligations under the current law?
I think a lot of them do. It's still a very popular topic. And if I'm really honest with you, we can tell when babies are going to be born. We have that prediction because we see the number of increases in the queries that come from both employers and employees. So up until May this year, from January to May, we've had 716 views of our video, which is on via our website. And we ran a training session last week, which had 18 people on it, but they're often refresher trainings, not brand new ones. But also we've had 207 direct queries about parental rights, 106 of those being employees and 19 being employers. 90, sorry. Yeah, there was one legal rep and 10 others.
Yeah, so 19 were...
So 207 direct, 106 were employees, 90 employers, one legal representative and 10 others. So others can be a family member, they could be somebody that's self-employed, it could be anybody that's asking a question around it, but doesn't fit into the other categories, really.
Yeah.
So we've had that. That's just this year. They cover all employment sectors, all size of businesses. So there's not one specific business type or size of business or anything. They're just generic.
Okay, that's interesting. Is there any particular element of the legislation that people, employers and employees, seem to misunderstand or misinterpret?
I don't think they misinterpret. Their queries around things along the common issues we have: the entitlement to public holidays during parental leave, payments of bonuses and other pensions, which includes pension. If you're on if you're in that unpaid period of parental leave, you know, what happens with those things? They're the things that come up. Social Security parental allowances, which we don't advise on because that falls under Social Security. Holiday calculations. So often holidays accrue throughout parental leave. And what some people do is they negotiate a reduction to their working week upon return for parental leave, and then employers aren't sure when they need to start recalculating holiday entitlement from, if you see what I mean. So we do those sort of things. Loss of parental leave when leaving an employer. So if you've had, let's just use our 6 weeks minimum paid, and you've had 2 weeks, and you're either looking for a new employer, or you're made redundant, or whatever happens, it stops. You lose the other 4 weeks because it doesn't carry forward to a new employer. Okay, so it stops with employer 1 and it isn't picked up by employer 2. Okay,
Because then you're not with the employer for a
yeah,
sufficient
you're
period
absolutely.
of time.
So you haven't passed any of that qualifying period. Now that's obviously, quite frankly, that's not going to be the birth mother. That's going to be the partner, really. In you know, like 99.9 cases. So that's that one. And the other thing is, the only other thing is that some employers want to be more flexible around what the law says. So the law talks about, the legislation sets down that you can have up to 52 weeks. We've already covered the 6 weeks paid. And it says that it has to be taken in over a 2-year period, and it cannot be. It's got to be taken in blocks of 3 blocks of not less than 2 weeks. Well, some employers would like to be more flexible around that. So would employees. So they might like a week in 3 weeks' time, and still effectively have, let's make it the 5 weeks, just as a number. And employers are try to be creative in an assisting way, not in a negative way, to get employees into that position.
But they're falling foul of actually what's stipulated
Of
in
the
the
law.
legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's potentially, but I do not know, that that's potentially because when it's the paid parental leave, the 6 weeks, that's around the payments received via Social Security, and they're a week behind by the time you get them. Do you see what I mean? But I don't know if that's about a mechanics situation rather than anything else.
Interesting. Thank you. That's very helpful. And how have employers managed to adjust to the equal attribution of parental leave?
Okay. They just take it on. If that's what the law says, that's what the law says. They've really been very, you know, it's a day one right. So if you start work today and you advise your employer you're pregnant or your partner's pregnant, then you're entitled. And this equalising, when the law was conceived, it was sorry, it was decided that actually it would be the equal balancing would remove gender bias at interview levels, because everybody's entitled to exactly the same. And I think employers thought, initially there was kind of like, ouch, but I don't think that that's been sustainable. Yeah. I think they've just taken it on the chin.
Okay. And in practice, you haven't seen any stigma in relation to that, or change of contractual behaviours?
No. They've just done what they've done, basically.
Having had interaction with employers on a professional level, do you get the sense that they perhaps understand the importance of supporting families in the workplace and the general contribution to society that makes? I think that as a rule they do. I think that there are some industries that, by the very nature of the beast, when there may be 24/7 industries, they struggle with that. But that's not about a lack of understanding. That's about a lack of inability to do things differently because the way things are. But I think most employers completely understand that, you know, family friendly is of legislation and rules and policies are of benefit to everybody. Thank you. Do you think there are any parts of the legislation that do put a strain on employers?
we haven't seen any of that. Only as I've talked about the potential for the prescriptive nature of the 2 weeks.
But you described the creative approach that some have tried to take to it. And would you say, in your professional opinion, that actually being able to be more creative might assist the administration?
I think it would. I think for some employers it would be very beneficial, and for some employees, of course. You know, some employees might only want to take a week, and it might be, for whatever reason, it might be a week so that they can, because their partner needs that break as much as anything else. So they don't want 2 weeks. They don't want to eat it all up in one go.
Yeah. Okay. And are there any other areas where you consider that perhaps there could be some more flexibility or amendments made?
Not really, no. No, I think it works reasonably well in practice, if I'm really honest with you. You know, obviously there's always teething issues when law first comes in, but it's just not... I think it's also one of those pieces of legislation that only affect you when you need it. So it becomes important when you need it. So people don't actually... They might know all about other pieces of the legislation, like minimum wage and stuff like that. But actually, they're only interested in this when they actually need it. So that's when they'll get that information from them.
So you mentioned that businesses seem to have adapted to this quite well. Are you aware of any cases at all where a business has folded or failed because they couldn't accommodate this part of the legislation?
None that I can specifically think of, no.
Okay, no. That's positive. And we talked briefly about stigma for fathers, and this came up in some of our other hearings, and some of the evidence that we've heard is that there is a stigma. It's more of a cultural one rather than always directly from employers. And if that's something that maybe isn't reaching you as an organisation, is there anything you can do to find out more about that, to make sure that that culture change element is incorporated in your training?
I think that there is a stigma around, and there always has been. It's not about fathers, it's about cultures in organisations. It's, it's the parent that leaves at 2:00 every day to do the school run who has comments in the workplace about, part-time work. So that's society. That's not going to change. It's not about one gender over another either. That's always been there. Gone are the days, thankfully, when people are not asked to interview how they're going to manage their childcare arrangements. But, these are historic things. Society needs a catch-up. It's not just about employers and it's not just about individuals. There is a catch-up. And culture is, from a completely different perspective. We saw some awful things which is a culture thing, being put out, last week on the roads, and, that spray painting, that's a culture thing. We can't change individual perception. All you can do is make sure that the employer is aware of the fact that actually it's inappropriate.
So you feel that stigma that has been mentioned to us by fathers is maybe kind of the same stigma that mothers have felt, and it's being felt anew by fathers because they have got these additional rights.
Yeah, I do. I think that's part of that balance that we were talking about. Sorry.
No, I just wondered if we could go back, if you finished on that, just to the where you said it didn't. If somebody seeks or changes employer part way through, can you just explain to me how that does or doesn't work? So, because if they're entitled to under the law from day one, can you just take me through it so I explain?
Because you're not employed. Okay. You're not employed by that employer. So if I'm employed by you, then my rights apply with you. It's my day one right with you, okay? And there's this process that needs to be going. There's notifying at 15 weeks, all of those things, putting the dates in the calendar, etc., etc. Yeah. I then leave you and I go into work with Deputy Doublé. All my rights are parked with you. They don't carry forward.
Okay. But so is it at the point at which the baby is born, the rights?
No, it's when people have, it's afterwards really. So it's when people leave and they've got a period of parental leave still outstanding. You can't move it on to a new employer.
And if we've got under the law, you can take it up to 3 blocks over, is it 2 years?
2 years, that's
It's
right.
a long period of time.
Yeah.
People may feasibly want to be moving, particularly the second parent who maybe hasn't had as long a period off. Is that something that you think could be improved or changed?
I think it could be considered, but I think it would be administratively very difficult because that would involve employers having to get information from other employers.
So, because the information on what's been taken already is held by the employer, not by a central government.
Yeah.
Okay.
Particularly when it moves from the unpaid, if it moves from
Yes.
paid to unpaid.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there'd have to be some kind of data permission
Yeah, absolutely.
granting
Yeah.
by the employee. Which
And
would-
is that something people talk to you about? Is that you do get people coming?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And wanting to move, maybe they feel they can't move because of that, or they can't access their full rights because they've moved.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Or understanding the consequences of leaving before they've taken that. That's so people will then structure potentially leaving in order to maximise their ability to have those rights.
Thank you for explaining that.
really
That's really
interesting,
interesting.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's go on to-
Yeah. Just a bit on communication. So, can you tell us a bit more about how JACS communicates information, particularly around family-friendly rights, parental leave to employers, employees, and unions? Obviously, you've talked to us about having face-to-face workshops. What else goes on?
We don't do anything particularly on one subject. We advise on all the employment law, so everything is the same. We treat every topic exactly the same because they're of equal importance to somebody else. So we have newsletters. We've got around about 1,200 people signed up to our newsletter. We've got a website that is very much used. Obviously, we've got videos on all sorts of different topics. We've got downloadable forms. We've got, and particularly on the website, we've got a whole booklet, for instance, on redundancy and another one on parental leave. But we've also got another one on working in Jersey because those were hot topics or are hot topics and they're quite dense topics. But to make it as easy as possible, we put that there's pictorials in there as well and flow charts to help employers work their way through processes. But there's also pro forma forms down there. So you have to complete a form you have to advise your employer, and we've made it as easy as possible for that to take place. We've used media, we've used Channel 103 at times. That's more of a recent thing, but we've also got social media as well, and we're currently in the process of developing a marketing strategy which is looking generically at the way we put information out, and that's where we go. Obviously, in-house topics, as I've already spoken to you about as well. So
it's clear there's a lot of information out there, and a lot of things to cover. Do you think that the current channels and means of getting that information out there are being effective enough? Are they getting to a wide enough audience?
I think so. I think the fact that actually, if we look at just using that number that I gave you earlier, between just specifically on family friendly, that 207 direct queries with respect to that, the review report only had 134 returns from people. So we've already had more people contacting us about it than the review had responses. The report
Ministers' review.
Yeah. So, and I think that that's important. We talk to interest groups as well, we'll around matters as well. So we also go into schools and talk not just about family friendly, but we do, but specifically about employment rights to young people. So
Okay. We have heard some evidence both in written evidence that's been sent to us and then in our hearings, that some people feel like they don't have all the information that they need, or they may be confused by the information that there is. Are you aware of those concerns? Is that something that's been raised with you?
No, because people will view the video, and at the end, for instance, at the video, it will say at the end, contact us. It's got our contact details. So you get that headline news, and then they'll contact us, and then they'll get more information that way, because that's not about giving all the nitty-gritty on your employment rights. That's about the headlines. And so I think that when it comes down to the employment and the discrimination side of it, people do have that information, and people don't seem to struggle to grasp that or to understand it. I think that there are things that we don't have any control over, we being JACS. I think that sometimes the partners of the birth mother or surrogate mother aren't advised when they need to get their applications in. I think that there is often a situation, and that's nothing to do with us. I think that the focus is often on, and I'm not saying it's wrong, is on the birth mother, but when somebody's being told this is how you apply for your rights and your benefits, I think the other partner needs to be involved and being saying, you need to do it separately, because then I think that that's not happening, and you need to be telling your employer of this, and that's not happening. Okay. So people sometimes don't tell their employer until the day the baby's born, and which is not what the law requires.
Okay. Do you see that happening?
I do.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I have
Yeah.
seen that.
What happens if that happens to somebody, say the second parent, and they don't tell their employer until the day their partner gives birth? What happens then?
In theory, they don't have the rights. Only the birth mother would have the rights. So the law talks, unless it was reasonably practicable. So obviously there will be situations where that reasonably practical barrier needs to be crossed. Okay. But other
So
times,
say the second parent didn't know
Yeah.
that they were about to become a parent.
absolutely,
Could they still then?
then they would exercise those rights. So,
Okay.
but if they've, if you've knowingly attended, I don't know, antenatal classes or
Yeah.
courses, and so it was reasonably practicable for you to know that your partner was going to have a baby, and you didn't notify your employer, then you haven't followed the statutory process.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful.
But then we don't have access to individuals, so it's not for us. There are other people that have the access, and we've offered to deliver training to those individuals, and they've not responded to us.
Is there any difference in the way you treat large employers and small employers? Do you do anything differently to try and access small employers who may not have the same HR kind of experience or legal team behind them?
We have we used to offer an outreach service, but we offer that, but the law applies to all employers. And there's no, size and administrative resources don't make a difference to that. So what we do is, if we see that there are issues, not specifically around family friendly, but if there are issues, if somebody's got a tribunal claim and there's an issue around, I don't know, what could it be? Holidays, let's make it holidays for a tribunal claim. Then we will talk to the employer about the whole of the law once they've already got a claim in, because we can't target them in any other ways. It's again, it comes down to, as it does with any piece of legislation, it's only relevant when it becomes relevant, when it's needed. The law sits there and it's a static piece of paper, but when it affects you, that's when you want to know more. Knowing more up front doesn't mean that it's going to be useful for you necessarily.
Thank you. So you mentioned a marketing strategy,
Yeah.
which sounds interesting. As we have heard, as Deputy Stevenson mentioned, from stakeholders and individuals that they are quite confused by the law, and I think I can understand that, because it's the law, the detail of the law is can be quite difficult to understand. But the marketing strategy that you're working on, is that what's the timetable for that?
We haven't got, it's being worked on. It's a work in
Okay.
progress. It's that new.
Okay.
So we're hoping to start probably rolling it out in fingers crossed, but not cast in stone
Yeah.
in September. But
Okay.
it's still being developed at the moment. But it's not about family friendly, it's about everything.
It's about everything, but it
Yeah.
will include
Yes,
the
it
family
will.
friendly.
Everything we do encompasses all parts of the legislation.
Okay, so would there be scope within that to take on board any recommendations from the evidence that we find about
Yeah.
maybe what needs to improve? Could that be incorporated into your
Yes,
strategy?
but I would hope that if people were confused, they would have told us about it. But I think people are confused about what we advise on. So there was a piece the other day that mentioned that the video was incorrect. It is not incorrect. If we advise on the employment law. We don't advise on social security benefits. We don't advise on pensions. The law applies to all employees. The benefits might apply to non-employees. So, for instance, you're not employees, but you might still be able to receive parental allowance. So that's not part of JACS' remit. We aren't able to talk about or to advise on things that fall outside of the employment and discrimination law. So that piece that was picked up on Monday and again yesterday, those statements were incorrect. Our video is absolutely accurate on the piece that we have remit to look at, which is the employment law, not social security.
Do you think that you should have remit to look at it in a wider sense? Because clearly it is confusing some people when there's only, and completely accepting that it's because it's not in your remit, but if they go to, say, your website or the video, they feel like they're only getting half the information.
Well, if they look, we in our booklet, it clearly states on page 10, we do not advise on social security. So that's attached to the video. We can't advise on benefits. We don't have access to benefits. We don't have access to contributions. So I can't say to you, you will be entitled to this. We will be saying you may have an entitlement under the legislation that applies to social security because it's all around your contributions. But what we could do is we could put a slide in there that says there may be benefits available, you need to contact social security. And that's all it would say, nothing more than that. Because I think that we already get asked questions that aren't linked to what our work is. And we need to keep that separation. We don't have access to people's information that the states hold. And we don't want it. And therefore we can't advise further on it. But we could put a slide in that video that says there may be benefits available, but it will only be maybe, because people, day one rights for employment, somebody comes here on a work permit, they're not going to benefit from those things because they won't have enough contributions, but they will benefit under the law.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the difference. It's about two different pieces of legislation. And in the same would be in the UK. ACAS don't advise on benefits. We have to keep that separation, otherwise we lose our independence and our confidentiality.
Thank you very much.
That's really, really helpful and interesting. I can see why the joint working with government is important there. Just going back to the marketing plan, some of the feedback and some of the things we've identified as people asking questions on social media, and obviously that's it's relatively new in terms of where information might get put out. Are there any plans in that marketing strategy to improve the output on social media? Because that's where we see questions raised quite frequently.
We won't be answering questions on social media. That is not the correct forum to be answering confidential employment questions.
No, what I mean is
to
have the information published.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
Such as reminding people that they
can contact us.
Yes, or that as a parent, the second parent, that they have to inform their employer if they're expecting a baby within a certain time frame.
Yeah,
To
absolutely.
be able to access their statutory benefit.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
So we've done small businesses. And then you've touched on the online course, and I think, did you say the most recent one was at 18 attendees?
That was just a refresher course. We've run probably since 2012. We've probably run around about 50 courses. And when new law comes in, we always concentrate more. Our focus is on this potential new piece that's coming in from 22nd of April at the moment, because we know that that's going to have a huge impact.
Who do you see on the family-friendly courses? Is it HR professionals or who
Anybody
is
and
it?
everybody.
Okay.
It can be employees, it can be union reps, people from the UK, because of course the UK has different law to us. So we've got a lot of UK-based employers. There is an awful lot of confusion around UK and Jersey law. We are not just a little county tucked on the end of the UK, which is what people perceive us to be until they start getting that information from us. So yes, so we encourage people to all over the place to do it. You know, anybody and anybody can join. I've had states members on the courses, so.
And if people can't attend courses, is there a way they can access that information? Can you do it online, or can you?
We don't record the sessions because, of course, we'd have to ask everybody that attended for permission to do that, and they might ask questions that they would rather not go out. And we don't provide the slides directly unless you've attended, because they're just aid memoirs and they won't have the relevance. So we will say to them, we will be running another session, but in the meantime, this is where you can look, this is what we've got, what else do you need from us?
Okay, thank you.
But it's a contact point, that's the main thing there.
Okay, thank you. Do you think we've covered that?
I think in some.
Okay. In terms of the legal provisions in relation to job protection, discrimination, flexible working or leave entitlements, I mean, you have covered some of this. Are there any that lack clarity in terms of the actual wording of the law, or anything that's difficult to enforce?
No, I don't think so. I think we don't have any sticking points with any. Once people are asking the questions and we can give them the answers, we don't struggle with giving the answers, if you see what I mean, or in a way that people understand. And I think that's important. Obviously, there was a change last year with flexible working when it went from one request in 12 months to 2, but that's not just about family friendly. So sometimes people do think it's just about families, but it's nothing to do with families. It's just a flexible working request for whatever reason you want it to be. So that we need to break that down, and that people understand that. They've completely grasped that now, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
But otherwise, no.
In terms of the flexible working, then, do you feel that there would be any improvements that either employers or employees might like further improvements in that area?
No, I think that the law is very clear. I think that we've got a very easy to read kind of flowchart thing that we've set out there, that people absolutely understand. And I think that, you know, because it could be for any reason at all. It could be around a disability. It could be around the fact that you want a wellbeing day. It could be around the fact that you want to reduce your hours. It could be for any reason. And you can apply for that and have that application heard, and that's fine. I think that there are some businesses, or no, not businesses, industry types that will struggle with pieces of legislation more than others. You know, I could think that requesting flexible working for, I don't know, nurses or teachers could be quite difficult, you know, but that's just an observation. It could be difficult for somebody to have flexible working if they work on a building site, for instance. And, you know, any industry is going to be challenging, challenged. Some will find it easier to comply with any part of the legislation than others, and that's just the way it goes.
Could you elaborate further on that? And to give you some detail from one of the hearings that we had earlier this week, we heard from some stakeholders that they informed us that their perception was that people working in hospitality had a more difficult time in their employers understanding their rights and accessing their rights, whereas those working in retail, they told us that the perception was that retail was more accommodating. What's your reflection on that?
We don't have, hospitality isn't a particular hotspot for us. It's not, we don't get masses more queries from hospitality than we do for anywhere else. I would have to understand more about that. Is it because hospitality has less employees, so they're smaller employers, you know, really, really small employers, or is it because it's a, well, not quite, but a 24/7 type industry? I don't know.
So you're open to finding out more about that, perhaps to tailor
is
your
it because they
training?
can't get the workforce? Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it perhaps be that people who are here on work permits aren't aware of JACS or the services that you provide?
I don't think so, because when we developed that front portal on our website, we developed that with immigration, and it's the working in Jersey piece, and we've got that video on there. And when people apply for their work permits, immigration send them those links so that they've got that understanding of us. So yesterday I saw 3 people independently, not linked to each other, on work permits on different matters. So, yeah. So I'm not sure, I don't know why it is. It could be, I don't know. It could be anything. I don't have any data that says it's one thing over another.
Okay. In terms of the family-friendly portions of the legislation, what are the most common concerns or disputes that people contact you about?
Well, only those things that I mentioned to you earlier around public holiday entitlement,
Yes,
bonuses
sure,
and
we did
pensions, all of those things that I mentioned up front, those are the areas of concern or queries, those sort of things, really.
Thank you.
And are there patterns when, if issues go further and do end up in tribunal claims, are tribunals typically...
We haven't had any
more area.
tribunal claims. Okay. We had one and we settled it literally within it arriving on our desks, because we just pointed out where the employer had gone wrong, and they saw it immediately and it was settled. But we don't have tribunal claims as a rule of thumb with regards to this.
Does that in itself, do you think that's evidence that the law is clear and that everybody understands it, or is it evidence that maybe people don't understand it, so they're not taking things further? What do you...
I don't think it's the latter, because we have more complex pieces of law that people are taking further. You know, so it's an understanding of the legislation as a whole. I think that it's because ultimately people are getting the information and they are exercising their rights. And also, so for instance, just this morning, I had an email in from an employee who said, my employer thinks I need to be working for 12 months. Shows them the video, it's absolutely crystal clear this is day 1 right. Within half an hour, I've shown them they've got it. So already we can see that as soon as that information is put in front of people, it's easy, they get it immediately. And I have no doubt we'll hear more from that employer looking for more detail rather than that headline news.
Thank you.
So those informational materials, you use them in a responsive way.
Yeah.
When there's problems, you can
Yeah.
send them out.
Yeah, look, show this to your employer, show this to your employee.
Yeah.
Because actually this might get the message over. And it's often really useful, particularly if English isn't the first language.
Sure.
Do you provide your information in other languages?
No, but it's accessible, so it translates really well, because we've already tested that. Because we don't have the finances, the resources to translate.
So when you say it is translatable, is there something on your website people can click that it translates, or do they have to kind of copy it out?
Into Google Translate or a similar.
Right, okay.
I'm not promoting Google, I'm just saying one of those similar services.
Sure. And is that part of your marketing plan that you would consider providing?
We can't afford to. We don't have the resources. It's a really expensive thing to translate documents. And what would you translate? How many languages would you need to translate it into? You know, because we have 56 languages being spoken in Jersey. So if you translate into one and you miss out others, could that be perceived as actually an act of discrimination because we're not providing that same service to others? So it's a really difficult line to think about. And it's quite cost prohibitive.
Have you ever looked into how much it would cost?
Yes, we have. We had one document. We've got had terms of employment translated into Portuguese, for instance, years ago. and we realised that actually we just couldn't go down that route with other languages. It was, I mean, this was years ago. We haven't done it recently, but we know it's cost prohibitive because we've heard other people of saying exactly the same thing. We don't have access to translators, so you're going to have to pay for translation services.
If, on that note, sorry, if you don't mind me asking another question, if people come to see you and English isn't their first language, do you have access to translators in that scenario?
No, we have a Portuguese speaker, and we will often use voice text as well. We will use that during our meetings with people, and that will help them. And we're always encouraging people to bring others with them if they're going to struggle, and they do. But no, we don't have access to translators.
Okay.
You have to bear in mind we're a confidential service, and that's the other thing that we need to be people are very nervous about other people hearing their stories if they haven't brought that person with them. So
say somebody had arrived from a country and they didn't speak English, and they had a problem. How would they be able to access that information to understand the law?
well, they'd either be directed to it by somebody that can do it, i.e. a friend that says, this is who you need to speak to, I'll come with you, or we can look at this together, or they will turn up and we will use, as I've said, voice text.
Okay, so you have people coming to you and they bring somebody with them who can translate. Are you aware of any services that do that provides the translation services?
No.
Okay. So is it
Because
fair
again,
to say
we
there's
wouldn't
a
be able
gap?
to afford to pay that. So
It's fair to say there's a gap there in some islanders not being able to access the services that you provide.
Well, there might be a gap. I can't say there is, because we do get people for whom English isn't a first language all the time coming to us. So I don't know. I don't know if there is or not.
But you feel you might need additional resources if
It would be an awful lot of more resources in order to do that.
Okay, thank you. In terms of, so you mentioned there were different tranches of changes to the employment law for family friendly. There was 2015, 2020, and then more recently. In terms of the inquiries that you received around those different stages, could you just tell us a bit more about how you had to respond to those?
We just did what we always do with any changes to the legislation. We're proactive, we start up front, we get it out there, we do all sorts of campaigns, I guess, as much as anything else. With regards to that, people start asking questions early, but if we get the information out as quickly as possible, they've got a baseline in which to ask their questions from, rather than going, oh, this is what the law says. Well, we will break that down and go, this is what the law says, but this is what has to happen, and this is how you're going to apply it. And we've made this as easy as possible. So then they have a user's guide, I guess, to understanding the legislation. And that will then formulate their questions.
And you mentioned the Minister's review of the legislation, which we've obviously read, and there weren't a huge amount of employers raising concerns in that review, which, I mean, I feel that probably demonstrates the effectiveness of what you're doing. Do you have any comment about that?
No, I think, as I said, employers are very, the fact that, what did I say, out of that 207, so 106 employees and 90 employers, it's really, and even over the year, not even just on this, but the employer-employee breakdown over all of our topics is quite close. So it's accessible for
And going back to some of those areas that you said you were getting kind of patterns of inquiries about, so you said pensions was one of them. Could you tell us a bit more about the problems that arise around that?
So it's whether a pension should still be paid when somebody's on zero pay, and that will depend on whether it's a contributory pension, because some pensions you can't pay into if it's contributory. So if you are, as an employee, have to pay into it and the employer has to pay into it, then it has to stop. It has to be paused during any times when you're in the unpaid period of parental leave.
And is that something that often there's contractual elements of? Because we've heard some suggestion that it may be in the contracts of employment employees around what would happen in those scenarios, or is that?
I think that one needs to be careful because there was reference yesterday to changes to contracts. People have terms of employment, not everything is contractual. So some things are policy, and policy can be changed very easily. If it's cast in stone as a contract,
Yeah.
it has to be negotiated. So I think there was confusion yesterday raised over an issue around changes to parental leave policies, and it was implied that they were contractual. They are rarely contractual. They are policies, just like a grievance and disciplinary policy, a redundancy policy. So pensions are often of a more contractual nature, particularly if they are contributory, because there is a triangular kind of relationship going on, pension provider, employer, employee. So you pay in, we pay in, they get that. So that's usually of a contractual nature, but for some there will be other benefits that won't apply during, because they're non-contractual.
Thank you.
And the other ones you mentioned were around holidays, so public holidays and
Yeah.
holiday entitlements. Can you elaborate on the problems that come
So
up?
the holidays is when, that's what I mentioned, it's about when people are looking to reduce their working hours when they return to work. So the law gives you the right to go back to the job that you did exactly as it stands, okay? So no loss of status, no loss of salary, no loss of hours. If you apply to reduce that, then it's when the employer makes that agreement and you accept those changes and when the holidays need to be recalculated from. Okay. So if you've gone down from a 5-day week to a 2-day week, for instance,
Yeah.
you're going to get less holidays.
Yeah.
So it's working out how you're going to, when that applies from what you're calculating it. And that's where that comes in.
Yeah.
When do we start applying that is where it comes from.
So that kind of detail, that's when your service would be most useful. Am I
Absolutely.
right that in
Yeah,
helping?
so that it's
yeah.
about individual, you know, it's you've got the top layer which is applies to absolutely everybody, and then you've got that really detailed layer that's specific to one person and might never come up again, or you know, is a bit more generic.
Sure. Yeah. So.
I think we've probably touched on one or two areas of this already, but are there areas where JACS would benefit from more resources or more legislative support or collaboration with government or third sector partners?
We are in the process of trying to negotiate some additional funds to update our website. It hasn't been done since 2018, so it needs a refresh and a kind of just a go over really as much as anything else. So that's what we're working on now. We don't really need, we can't really work too closely with government because that could impact our independence and our impartiality. The line that we walk and the confidence that people have in us is around the fact that we are completely independent and we are absolutely confidential. So things like FOI doesn't apply to JACS. So we need to be very, very careful about blurring of those lines. We cannot operate as a business, as an industry and as a service if those lines are blurred and people perceive that we are working too closely with government.
Okay, thank you. Is there, to go right back to the beginning of the questions, I think there was some comments you made about not always knowing when legislation was perhaps coming as early as you could do. Is that something that could be improved, or is it just the nature of the beast that sometimes these things...
Yeah, it's just the nature of the beast, because apart from anything else, you know, we could prepare for a piece of legislation that might come in August and the states don't agree it. So, you know, that's not finger pointing, it's just a statement of fact. Law evolves. We have to be on the front foot always to ensure that we are ahead of that evolution and that we are working with it. So that preparedness for this legislation that was passed on the 22nd of April started in January. We are ready to go and push that button to say, we've got everything in place now, it just hasn't got a date. But that's ready. As soon as that's ready, as soon as we get the date, that will go. but we've already put it out there.
In which case, your comments about that fine line and how you work with government, yet you are completely funded by government, or do you get funds from elsewhere as well?
We're mainly we get some money from in-house training, but very little.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a tension in that relationship, isn't
Yeah.
there, particularly when it's public money?
Yeah.
How does that kind of accountability with the money work? Are you assessed by government? Do you...
It's all down to the grant assurance document that's with SPPP.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And has KPIs and things in it?
But
or-
our KPIs are in our annual report, which you've already got.
Yeah.
So,
Fine.
yeah.
Okay. And do you help feed back into government with your data and things so that they can use it to inform their policy development?
The annual report does that, but also meetings, information. So, our data, because we can anonymise it so easily, can be used at any point. So anybody will make an approach. If we get information, if we get a spike in queries on X, then we would be able to say, we will give it out when it's asked. States members come to us for information, and we will share that information because it's publicly available information. It's just anonymised.
Thank you.
Yeah, just realised the time.
Yeah.
Any of these that you think?
I think we've been.
Yeah. Okay. Any final? No. Okay. We have come to the end of our time together. Is there anything that you would like to add before we close the hearing?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well,
So
thank you very much for your time, and thank you for answering all of the questions.
You're very welcome.
We may have some further follow-ups once we've reflected, and if so, we'll write to you
No problem.
in that case.